Good evening and welcome to Nothing But the Truth. I'm your host, Trudy Stern. The Middle East is undergoing one of the most significant strategic shifts that we've seen in decades. Iran, long the region's chief destabilizer, has been weakened, and so too have its primary terror proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. That reality has shaped the balance of power across the region, but not in simple or predictable ways. Saudi Arabia is emerging stronger, aligning more closely with Turkey and Qatar, while also deepening coordination with Egypt and Pakistan. At the same time, we're seeing growing tensions between Saudi Arabia and the UAE and a noticeable shift in Saudi rhetoric toward Israel. At the same time, Syria is still a wild card, with the central question being whether Jolani's claimed transformation is legitimate or just a new mask. And that leads to a critical question. Has Israel emerged from this war in a more dangerous position with stronger enemies now closer to her borders? To help us make sense of this moment, we are joined once again by one of Nothing But the Truth's most trusted voices, Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan is the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and one of the leading experts on Middle East strategy, Iran, and U.S.-Israel relations. Jonathan has been with us time and again, helping us to cut through the noise and understand what actually matters. And we're so grateful for his clarity and his insights. Jonathan Schanzer, welcome back to Nothing But the Truth.
Thanks, Trudy. Good to be back with you.
So great to have you, and particularly at this very, very tense and critical moment. So let's start right in with what's been happening this week, Saudi rhetoric toward Israel. Saudi Arabia was close to normalizing relations with Israel, and now we're hearing openly hostile rhetoric in Saudi media and even from religious leaders. What changed? What's going on? Could you tell us?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things at play here. Number one is that the Saudis were just unable to normalize over the last 2.5 years. I don't think they were interested in doing so under Biden. Biden had essentially ostracized the crown prince because if you remember the Jamal Khashoggi affair, the murder of that Saudi critic in Turkey back in 2018, the Biden administration was really reticent to engage in a full relationship with this regime. And so things had to wait until, I think until Trump came back to his second term. It was at that point that I think we all thought that the Saudis would just march ahead with normalization, except there's a war going on. And that war, the images of that war in Gaza have made it very difficult for the Saudis. Got to remember, they see themselves, and many see them as the leaders of the Arab world and maybe even of the Islamic world, given that they're the custodians of the two holiest mosques in Islam. And so the optics were not right. And now I think there's some other things that are happening. One is that the Saudis and the Emiratis, as you just mentioned, are in a significant contest. I got to say, I don't think it's very healthy, but the Saudis are trying to differentiate themselves from the Emirates. They are trying to show that they have an independent path as they compete for influence with a country that was not too long ago seen as one of their closest partners. And now, based on, I think, its personality, primarily between the two leaders, the Saudis have drifted away from the Emirati model. And the Emirates, of course, they're the ones who made peace with Israel, the normalization agreement back in 2020. They have been, I would say, stalwart allies of Israel throughout this entire war. They kept flying their airlines to Israel throughout the war, no rupture in diplomacy. And now as the Saudis think, okay, well, we need to differentiate ourselves, they're going down a very different path. And you mentioned possible, alliances with Turkey or with Qatar or Pakistan or Egypt. This is not the crew that I'd like to see the Saudis hanging out with, right? I really like the idea of a unified, pragmatic, moderate Gulf coalition. We're not seeing it. We're seeing more fractures, and those fractures are giving way to more hostile rhetoric about Israel, even a little bit that is, I think, verging on anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish. This is not a good sign for the Saudi kingdom. I don't know if we're past the point of no return, But I would say that as we watch all of this, it's not what we were hoping for. People are saying now out of Israel, normalization will almost certainly not happen between Saudi and the Israelis for the entire year of 2026. It's going to take a while to get back to the good place that we had almost been at a few years ago.
Well, I know we've always heard the phrase, be careful for what you wish for. So Iran being degraded seems to be the catalyst for this whole new shifting in the Middle East. Can you just talk about that for a moment?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I think we all need to understand something here. Every time you shift the balance in any sort of political system, right? When there's a vacuum, when there's weakness, where one player was strong and then they become weak, that changes the way all the others see themselves. This we could say this in American politics. You know, you have somebody that leaves the scene or they retire from the Senate or from the House. It allows for new challengers to come into the picture. This is what's happening with the Iranians, right? The regime is weak. Right now, the Trump administration is threatening to bring it down. The Israelis defeated them militarily. Their nuclear sites were destroyed. But then on top of that, they're having a water crisis. They're having an economic crisis. They have protesters that are out in the streets calling for the end of the regime. They look weak everywhere. And so what you're watching now are regional players that are thinking about how they can fill the void. And so the Saudis are one. I think, look, they are not a military power, nor are the Emirates, nor are the Qataris, right? These are all, they have money and they have influence, soft power, and they're looking to try to expand to the extent that they can. The one that I think is able to fill the gap from a military perspective is Turkey. And that's the one that I'm very worried about. They have, you know, we call it neo-Ottoman ambitions, this idea of reviving the Ottoman Empire. They want to become regional powers again. They want to become world powers. They have the second largest army in NATO. They have, it's not a terrific economy, but they're boosted by the Qataris who have endless wealth. But more, I think, to the point right now is we're watching them try to gain physical leverage in multiple countries around Israel. So, you know, they're trying to get boots on the ground in Gaza for whatever comes next, phase two of the 20-point Trump plan for a rebuilt Gaza over time. But you got to remember the Turks are sponsors of Hamas, and they're not exactly playing well with others in this space, but they're trying to get in there. We're hearing also that the Turks are funding and supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is very new and very disturbing because Hezbollah used to just be an Iranian proxy, and now we're seeing the Turks. These are, you know, rivals, if you will, of the Iranians. They're getting a foothold in Lebanon. They have almost full control over the new government in Syria. The Turks do. They're putting in weapons. They're putting in personnel. A huge amount of influence. I might even call it control. And you can see the way that they're battling the Kurds, they're battling other minorities in Syria. There's like a civil war that's potentially brewing, and I would, you know, say that there's a direct line to Turkey's influence there. They have influence in Iraq. In other words, when you look at the way that Iran had projected influence and power across the region, they're waning, and the Turks are filling the gap. But it's chaotic, right? Because this is all in flux. And the Israelis, they want to have a place in the region too. They want to project power. And so you're seeing a contest play out. And it's not one that makes me feel good right now because there's a lot of uncertainty and doubt that is thrown into the picture and a lot of different ways that this thing could shake out.
Well, it seems that if there is an alliance between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and Pakistan, you will have a lot of money from Saudi and Qatar, a lot of people from Turkey and Egypt, and nuclear weapons from Pakistan. And that seems like a very, very difficult group to fight.
Well, when you put it that way, yes, right? I mean, but I don't know if they are necessarily all thinking I don't know if they all have hostile intentions. I don't know if they're looking to coalesce and wage war, right? What it sounds like they're kind of mulling right now is a defense-oriented pact. I do think that Israel will be a focal point. They don't like what has been happening in the Gaza Strip. They don't like the war that has been waging across the Middle East. They don't like how Israel, has encroached upon their neighborhood in the Gulf in particular, when on September 9th of last year, the Israelis took out some Hamas or tried to take out Hamas leaders in Doha. In other words, Israel brought the war much closer to some of these countries than they were ready to countenance. But I don't know if I think it might be early to say that we are on the precipice of some kind of new regional conflict with this coalition. I think it's early days for that, but I would say that the intent of Pakistan, the intent of Turkey, the intent of Qatar is not good, right? They are adversaries, if not enemies, of the state of Israel. And they're not exactly terrific American allies either. And so, again, we have this sense of flux, which is creating uneasiness across the region. We're watching the map change in real time.
Well, the thing is, let's hope none of them are listening to this discussion, because I think that would be a very difficult alliance to fight against for anyone. And I think if you could just weigh in on what this would do to the West in general. Like, yes, it would be super dangerous for Israel, no question, and it is dangerous what's going on right now for Israel, but it's just a precursor to the West and to America. So America is stepping in here. America is enabling all of these countries by giving them seats in the board, this new board of peace, and giving the illusion that there could be peace with these particular countries, when in reality, these countries are anti-West and anti-Israel.
Yeah, and I think this is the logic of Donald Trump is what I think we're questioning here to some extent. And I think we just, we can acknowledge this by bringing in Qatar and Turkey, particularly to this board of peace, right? They're letting the fox into the hen house, right? These are two Hamas sponsors that,
But wait, I don't want to cut you off.
yep.
Just give us a couple of sentences about the Board of Peace.
Oh, sure, of course. So this is the implementation of phase two of Donald Trump's 20-point plan. He created the plan in the fall of last year. It was actually adopted by the UN on November 24th of last year. So it's essentially international law, the process that's going on here right now. It's supposed to lead to the dismantling of Hamas, the creation of some kind of new government in Gaza, and the disarmament of Hamas, and essentially work toward the end of the war. And so Donald Trump at Davos just a few days ago comes out and makes these announcements that we're inviting a number of countries onto this Board of Peace. And look, there are good people from the United States. I mean, American businessmen, people that truly are committed to peace. And then there are some of the countries that are represented on this thing that you got to scratch your head and wonder what's going on, right? The Qataris and the Turks, in particular, they bother me a lot for this because they are patrons of Hamas. They are funders of Hamas. They have headquarters of Hamas. They're not interested in peace in the Middle East. They've made that abundantly clear throughout this 2.5 year war. But by the way, they're not the only problems, right? We've got Putin, Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator strongman, the guy who launched the war back in 2022 against Ukraine, not interested in peace. What role is he going to have? You got Lukashenko from Belarus, who's been a party to the bloodshed in Russia and Ukraine. What's he doing on this board, right? So, but Donald Trump looks like, and this is what I think we need to understand, is there is a logic that maybe you try to co-opt these countries. In other words, you say they've been playing a negative role and they've been undermining the United States at the UN. They're undermining the American-led world order. They're trying to, pick apart some of our alliance structures. And Donald Trump may be saying, okay, well, we want you in the tent. So I'm creating a new tent and you're invited, but you got to play nicely with everybody inside the tent. It's a big risk. And, it's not to say that this has failed yet, But I think that's what we're all concerned about right now is that this might be just a bridge too far, a long throw from third, right? I mean, this is kind of what folks are worried about right now is that, maybe we just created something that we can't control.
Well, how much say does Israel have in this Board of Peace?
I mean, they have, I mean, Bibi is represented there, the Prime Minister of Israel, and to the extent that he has sway with Donald Trump, and maybe some of the other members of the board. Yeah, there is some influence for Israel, but I would just say it's a pretty big tent right now, and the process is still very much something that I don't understand. How are they going to function? In what ways will they operate? How much power will they have? How will that translate to facts on the ground in Gaza? But then there's the other part of this, Trudy, which is the strangest thing in the charter of this organization, it doesn't even mention Gaza. And so what we're hearing right now is that Donald Trump may try to use this for Gaza, but he also may try to use it to end the war in Ukraine. He may use it for any of the other conflicts where the United States has tried to intervene and to mediate. Donald Trump talked about this at Davos, that he was working on like 8 different conflicts. We all know he's been thinking about a Nobel Peace Prize. That's come up time and again. And I think he sees this Board of Peace as perhaps a vehicle to help him get there. This is a direct threat to the UN. Just to be very clear, the UN is not happy about the creation of this. It's sort of the new Trump world order that it looks like he's trying to create, and nobody knows what that means. And by the way, this is all happening while our NATO allies are really unhappy about Donald Trump's moves in, Greenland. The tension that exists between the United States and some of the NATO countries as it relates to Ukraine and military spending and Russia. And so you get a sense right now, talking about upheaval, right? The map changing. We're watching this happen not just in the Middle East, where you see some shifting alliances, but you're getting a sense that our entire alliance structure right now and the international system that we created after World War II, it's not thrown out yet, but there is an alternative now that exists that could begin to encroach upon the UN and NATO and our European alliance structures that, didn't exist a few days ago. And so, the understanding this right now, I think helps us put a finer point on how complicated the world seems to be, just, you know, more so than it was just even a few short weeks ago.
Unbelievably complex, and that is it's very, very frightening. What do you think was the idea behind this Board of Peace? Was it to usurp the United Nations, or was it to get a Nobel Peace Prize, which he already has? Machado gave him the Peace Prize. He doesn't need it.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't in his name, and taking somebody else's prize is, it's second best, right? And we know Donald Trump doesn't like second best. He wants to be the top dog. So I think he's waiting for his own prize in his own name, and I think that may be part of what's going on here. I mean, I will say when you hear from UN officials, like U.S. officials, U.S. UN. They will say, look, we're not trying to dismantle the UN. And you may have seen the Trump administration successfully cut a huge amount of their budget. They cut a huge number of employees. They're trimming fat. They're making the UN less horrible and less bureaucratic, less bloated. I think that's a good thing. They're still saying that they want the UN to play a role in solving international conflicts. And yet, we see this new thing that was supposed to be created for Gaza, but instead it looks like it could have a much wider remit. And that is the thing and I got to tell you, Donald Trump may not know. And this is the thing about Donald Trump, right? His policies always afford him maximum flexibility. Like we're watching him right now in the Persian Gulf, right? We have this massive armada. We're ready to strike if given the order. Our military is ready to do it and could do a lot of damage. Donald Trump hasn't made a choice yet. He has this weapon or series of weapons, a system of weapons, but he's using it right now to create uncertainty and doubt and anxiety inside Iran. He may use it for diplomacy. He may use it for regime change. He may use it to degrade the regime. He's got options. He has the same options with the Board of Peace, right? He can use it to challenge the UN. He can use it to challenge our European allies. He can just use it for Gaza. I don't think he's made the decision yet. And this is I've been calling it, it's not the fog of war, it's the fog of Trump. Trump leaves that ambiguity out there, and he's very good at using it. Look, our enemies really don't like it, but here's the funny thing. Our allies can get a little anxious about it too, and so can American foreign policy analysts get a little nervous because we don't understand how to explain what's going on other than to say, hey, lots of options. It could be good, it could be bad. That doesn't exactly help things, right?
Well, the thing is that the options remain in Trump's hands, and I think I'm confident with him holding the cards, but I don't know how confident I am with other leaders in America holding those cards. And he's only going to be president for the next couple of years, and then it's a new team, and that new team is going to inherit all of these things that President Trump has put into play, and that is very frightening to think, you know, there are a lot of options and there are a lot of people who could fill, who make those choices.
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot right now about, I don't know, a president, AOC, Alexandria Cortez, right? The idea that she could inherit some of these instruments of power, influence, or diplomacy. Yeah, scary. A lot of people say, JD Vance could use them in ways that maybe Trump didn't intend. But these are the things that happen all the time as administrations change hands. We're still going to have a seat at the UN, and that can be weaponized if they want. There's still going to be the, commander in chief of the military. It holds no matter what the tools of power are, the tools of influence. But I think, I think we're right to be wary right now of the short-lived nature of whatever Trump creates, and how much he's able to supercharge these initiatives in the time he moves so fast. And I think that's the thing we just don't understand. It would be, look, again, I need to stress here, he could use this to help solve the Ukraine crisis. And if he is able to do that and to end a war there, that's a very positive thing. And I'd welcome it, right? If we can actually strong arm Hamas to disarm and to dismantle itself through this mechanism, it would be wonderful. We just don't really know how it's all going to be used yet.
Well, this board of peace being made up of Turkey and Qatar, this is, not a good sign for peace in that region. It almost is worse than having Iran supply Hamas.
I mean, I don't know. I say it's worse because the thing that I look, there's good and bad. Number one is, it's bad because we've let the worst actors, and some of the worst patrons of Hamas into this structure, and we're legitimizing these governments when we shouldn't, right? We've been calling them allies for years, bipartisan. It's not only Trump. Everybody has been, embracing the Qataris and the Turks, and we need to change that. And instead of starting to erode their power and influence, it looks like we're giving them more legitimacy through this board. But the other way of looking at it is if you've got lots of other actors in the board, they could be marginalized and they could find themselves without much room to maneuver. My problem is that when you look at the way in which both of these countries operate in Washington, I don't see Trump curtailing their influence. The Qataris, they just secured a defense pact with Trump. They're going to have an Air Force training base in Idaho as a result of their relationship. At FDD, we've been tracking the money that they sink into the United States. They have hundreds of billions of dollars that they've invested all over the United States, which has bought them influence at higher ed, in K through 12, in Washington, I'm not seeing them getting sidelined. I see them getting more powerful as a result of their vast wealth. And the Turks, I got to tell you, they are encroaching into the Middle East with regional power. And I'm watching our envoy to Syria, Tom Barrack, the American ambassador to Syria, or to Turkey, rather. He has been giving a green light to the Turks to occupy Syria. And so when I look at their growing power, militarily, economically, influence wise, I'm not thrilled with what I see, but the jury's still out. Again, Donald Trump works in mysterious ways. I got to see where he takes this before I can make a final judgment.
So not forcing you to make a final judgment, but um, what could possibly be a positive reason that President Trump would be allowing and enabling all of this Qatari investment in our country and the Air Force that they're training that they're going to get from our country? What could a possible um, good motive be here?
Yeah. So, I mean, you know,
And by the way, I want to throw in that
yeah.
President Trump is not an ignorant person. He's not a stupid person. He's very brilliant, actually. So I don't think they've roped him in or, tricked him into doing this. I think he is very aware of what he's doing. What could the real end game be?
Look, here's how I would say this. The idea that money is coming into the United States from Qatar is not in itself a bad thing. If they were investing in businesses, right, investing in things that would yield them money and actually help finance American initiatives, I don't see a problem with that. And there probably is hundreds of billions of dollars of Qatari money floating around for exactly that purpose. It's the influence that I don't like, right? Buying up influence in higher ed. What does an Islamic autocracy of 330,000 people, what do they need to put $20 billion into our institutions of higher ed? They're trying to influence what's being taught. Why are they putting millions of dollars into K through 12 education? They're trying to influence our kids. That's where I draw the line. And it's where I think the Trump administration will also, at some point, need to draw the line. And I think there is a growing awareness that this is a problem. It hasn't been addressed yet. My hope is that 2026 is the year where foreign influence is curbed within this administration. With the Turks, I got to say it's far less understandable to me because Trump has a bromance with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey. He likes him because he's kind of a tough son of a bitch. And you just get this sense that, it's not based on anything rational. You see the Turks having, a powerful military. They have assets that we need for basing and things like that, which are helpful to the U.S. But we should be doing far more to curb their advances in the Middle East. We should not be allowing this regime to fill in some of the void that Iran may be leaving. And I think that could be the one big blind spot for Donald Trump. The Israelis, I got to say, they've been very happy with what Trump has done in the region. I think the Iranian people are still, even though we didn't come to their rescue yet, we still might. They're still happy that Trump is calling for the regime to go down. And there is a sense of inevitability that this will happen because Trump is saying so out loud. So there's good things that are happening across the Middle East. This could be the blind spot, though. The Turks, in particular, with a little bit of Qatari money splashing around in there. This could be his blind spot that he doesn't understand that whatever comes in the wake of the collapse of the Iranian regime could be a new coalition of Sunni radicals that would further threaten the region.
Well, President Trump was so proud of the Abraham Accords, and as he should be. Um, and he was very hopeful that Saudi would come in on the Abraham Accords. And now it seems that that is absolutely not happening. And the Abraham Accords are almost, I wouldn't say falling apart because those countries that have already joined in are not pulling out. But it seems like these tensions have so grown and are so big at this point that, that's definitely not going to be happening. They say that we had on our show Senator Joni Ernst telling us that on October 6th of 2023, right before the war, she was in Saudi with a Kodal, and they were having drinks at the thought that the next day they were going to be joining the Abraham Accords, only to find out that war broke out the next day.
Yeah.
So,
It's frustrating. I mean, I will say, it did feel like, Trump had the Saudis on, like the 5 yard line. And then he lost the election. Of course, he would say he didn't lose the election, but, we don't need to get into the political narrative here. He loses power. And as I mentioned, Biden comes in. Biden does not have a good relationship with the Saudis. It's a very contentious one. And so we have 4 years of, it's sort of, you don't know where we're going. It was just sort of confusion, lack of direction. I got to say, I'm not sure I would agree that we were that close on October 6th of 23 because Biden was still in. And I don't think it was ever going to happen. I don't think MBS was ever going to give Biden the win. I don't think he wanted to give him the Nobel Prize. I don't think he wanted to give him whatever Biden thought he could get. And so I saw him holding out. But I did think that no matter who came in after Biden, I thought that we would have a pretty darn good chance at normalization. And unfortunately, that's not where we're heading right now. And I think that's a shame because if we were able to somehow wrangle the Saudis in, I think dominoes would begin to fall. Other Arab states, other Muslim states would sort of say, got it. Well, we can't be holier than the Pope, so to speak, right? And if the Saudis have gone this far, well, then we can too. And the fact that we're not going down that road right now, I think is, it's a real negative for the region as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't mean that all hell's breaking loose tomorrow, but it just means that the idea of consolidating an alliance under the American-led order in the region seems further away. It seems more chaotic. And, again, this is part of the blind spot that I think that the Trump administration is going to have to get past. They're going to need to try to find a way to bring everybody together. They're going to have to figure out ways to sideline the Qataris and the Turks. They're going to have to try to empower this natural alliance that exists between, the Emiratis and the Israelis. I'd love to empower them more and to give them more alliances, more structures to work with. But now there are competing actors that are nudging their way into the scene.
well, not only that, but the UAE is becoming a pariah almost with Saudi Arabia, really with these tensions, and they once were such great allies, and
Yeah.
now they seem
You know
more.
what? It comes and goes in the Gulf. You got to remember at the end of the day, these are tribal countries. And so they'll have alliances, they'll compete, they will have, breakups, and they get back together again. Right now, we're kind of at a low point, and I don't know how long it lasts. It is undeniably connected to the personalities of the two leaders of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They're very powerful men, they're very wealthy men, they're very young. They both see themselves as the emerging or even established leaders of the region. And as long as they both hold that view of themselves, we're likely to see competition for a time. And that's the competition that's playing out right now. And again, I think it is dividing the Middle East, making it a little bit easier for the Qataris and the Turks to, elbow their way in. And it certainly does not make it seem as if the United States, these are two close allies of the US, when they are at odds with one another, it does not make us look like we have a lot of control.
Do you think that's a goal of the Saudis to do that?
I don't know if it's a goal. I think it's an independent streak on the part of Mohammed bin Salman. We know he can be quite impulsive. We've seen this in the past. He's thinking about his own legacy in the region. He's looking at the weakening of Iran. He's feeling less threatened because Iran is getting weaker. He feels like he can do more right? He can assert himself more across the region. That's what's happening here. I think a secondary effect is that, the U.S. looks like it has less control over its own alliance structures in the region. I will say that if war breaks out between Iran and the United States and Israel, um, some of these other countries, including the Saudis and the Emirates and the Qataris, they will all be within missile range of Iran. And they're going to need the defense architecture of Central Command of the United States. And this could be a moment, if war does erupt, where the U.S. is able to wrangle everybody together and make it very clear that they are all in the same boat. They are still highly dependent upon the United States for defense. And, this could be a way for the United States to corral all of these allies and to put them on the same page.
So, okay, final question. Um, when you step back and you look at the big picture of what's happening right now, the Saudi shift, the tensions with the UAE, the new regional alliances, Iran's instability, the plans for Gaza. What does that mean for long-term security of Israel? And then if you bring it home to America, because I always am a firm believer that what really happens with regard to Israel is a foreshadow of the West, the entire West.
Yeah, canary in the coal mine. Look, I think a couple of thoughts. Number one is the Israelis are still thinking about what's right in front of them. And what's right in front of them at this moment is an Iranian regime that continues to call for death to Israel and, to your point, death to America, right? Both. Um, and they've got 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 missiles, whatever it is that they have in their arsenal right now. The Israelis are worried that they could come under attack and that they would, have to defend their skies. And that's not easy, given the sheer numbers of missiles that the Iranians can fire. That's the first thing that we're thinking about. And so this is a U.S. Iran confrontation that's looming. Maybe diplomacy saves the day, maybe not, but we are absolutely at a crossroads here. The region is like the tension at the region is sky high. I can't stress enough how tense the region feels right now. Flights are getting shut down and, airspaces are getting closed and evacuation plans are being discussed. This is all happening within a massive armada of the United States sitting in the Persian Gulf, bearing down on the Iranians. This is all happening as we speak. The When we think about the next steps, which I think that this is kind of what you're getting at, which is what happens if and when Iran falls, the regime falls, and we have this sort of chaotic move to fill the vacuum. Look, I think the point for the US is to try to empower Israel. And this is in the new national defense strategy. The Trump administration talks about how incredibly valuable the Israelis are as an American ally because they fight for themselves, by themselves. They're not asking for the United States to come in and, right. So I think there is an understanding in the United States, in the halls of power in Washington, that Israel is a model ally and that we need to empower it. What I think we have not done here in the United States, at least from what I've seen, is to think about how to empower, whether it's Israel, Israel and the UAE, Israel, UAE, and I don't know, maybe a couple of other countries, Morocco, the ones that I think have, Bahrain, the ones that have been part of this alliance structure that we created. How do we empower them at the expense of some of these other bad actors? And I would say that this is the strategy question the Israelis have not yet been able to tackle fully. The United States needs to do more on this. But what we don't want to see, I think this has become very clear in our conversation today, we don't want to see the Qataris, we don't want to see the Turks emerge as regional powers. If the Saudis do emerge as a regional power, they need to do so, I think, within the rubric of the alliance structure that we've created. All of these things are going to be really necessary.
So a couple of other good actors that are in the region who we didn't really talk about, but we can wait till next time. Azerbaijan and also Somaliland.
We can absolutely talk about those. I don't know if they're going to have a direct role anytime soon, but it is heartening that there are other allies out there, smaller allies, less powerful, in many ways. But the more we can build, the better.
Well, strategically important, actually.
Yep.
So Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us, for always coming back to the show. You do something so important. You connect the dots that others miss. And by seeing behind the scenes and exposing the reality of what's really happening, you make a dangerous and confusing world much clearer. And in doing so, you help make it safer for all of us. We are so deeply grateful for your insights, your honesty, and your willingness to say what needs to be said. So thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us. This has been Nothing But the Truth with our very special guest, Jonathan Schanzer. You can catch us every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on the radio, but if you missed any part of this show or want to listen to any of our past episodes, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.